just for me to understand, how many people actually know who JF Hillebrand is? Can you just raise your hand? Yeah. So that's not a lot. That's great. So we are a global company that specializes in logistics for beer, wine, and spirits. So we consider ourselves a specialized company that's dedicated to the industry that you guys are working in. Sorry, I just have to get used to this. Okay, so I was asked by the event planners if we could come and talk a little bit about how to optimize international and domestic logistics for the wine industry. So considering we had 30 minutes, we came up with 7 different examples that are gonna introduce you guys to some of the things that we deal with on a daily basis, share some examples, and then you guys have a little bit of a takeaway that you can look at. So this is gonna be based on small businesses, big businesses. Obviously, you can't come with the tailor-made solutions for Southern Wine and Spirits and a little guy that import 1 pallet. We look at logistics very differently. So, do we have importers and distributors in the room today? A couple of them. Suppliers? A couple of suppliers, okay. So there'll be a little bit of everything. So, before we get into the actual examples, this is what we're going to talk about today. So you guys need to understand a little bit of the industry landscape, because this is a big part of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So for you guys to come up with a solution to manage your supply chain, you also need to have a little bit of an understanding what's actually going on. The shipment strategies we want to come into is we're going to pitch to you guys a couple of examples on what we see in the market that people are doing to bring products smartly into the business. And then risk management, very wide topic, but we'll touch on a few of the points. And then in the end, we're going to talk about provider relationships. So, industry landscape. For some of you guys, this might not be a common view, a crane and a ship and a lot of containers. For us, it's a daily life. And then obviously, we hope we can enjoy some wine at another time. But a lot of things have happened the last 5 years when we look at the industry. The shipping lines, which is a huge part of what we deal with, have been delivering very depressing numbers. So a lot of red numbers. The result of this has been a lot of alliances has been created. So the shipping lines are going together, which means instead of dealing with 20 companies, now we might only deal with 10 companies. This has an effect on the overall business, because you're not getting the small vessels that has high frequency. When you look at New York, a lot of the vessels that come into New York from Europe, they have 5,000 to 8,000 TEUs. A TEU is a 20-foot container equivalent of. What's happening in the industry is that the big shipping lines now, when they go into alliances, is that they load on bigger vessels. So instead of 5,000 to 8,000, they go all the way up to 22,000 containers on a ship. That means you're not going to get a ship that comes in Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to spread out all the containers. You're going to have a ship coming in on Wednesday with 20,000 containers. That has an effect on the business that we deal with, but it has an effect on everybody, right? IKEA, Walmart, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and the effect of that, of course, is congestion, it's delays, and then we need to have some considerations in accordance to how do we plan our lead time, how do we plan our inventory, et cetera. On top of that, we also have the infrastructure in the US. So we're talking a lot about trucking over the road, where there's new regulations in accordance to managing the hours of driving that's allowed by a driver and a chauffeur. Those are reducing, the control is becoming more and more strict, and on top of that, it's very, very difficult to find drivers, because it's not a high-paid job, and it's not necessarily a glamorous job position. So it's, for us, it's glamorous because it's such a crucial part in the supply chain, but for the public, it's not always that straightforward. Rail. You guys are going to see a lot more moving on rail, and there's been a lot of investments in the rail infrastructure in the US. So when you look at a rail with trains full of containers that are going in one direction, this is a two-way rail, meaning if a rail comes opposite, one guy has to pull out, stop, reduce the speed, and the other one will pass, and when it's passed, it's going to pull back on the same rail. So what the infrastructure has improved is that they've actually done double rail. So double rail track means that they can pull out to the sides and they can pass each other without doing a complete stop. So that improves the speed. It improves the transit time, meaning overall it's an optimization. So this is positive. So that was the 3-minute summary of what's really going on from an industry update. I think getting into more details will be a very long conversation. So what the real interest for you guys is definitely the strategies. So we wanted to look at the first example, which is how to optimize shipments for small and medium-sized brands. So when we talk about that, there's different ways of looking at the business. Consolidating your goods into one container, meaning if you have multiple suppliers as an importer, can you put all of them into one container and then be more efficient in terms of full container cost versus LCL cost, so small pallet cost, right? You can do that more efficiently if you buy X Works from a winery, because then you're in full control of the business. There's also another solution, which is instead of you trying to buy from 10 different suppliers and build up a full container, which might be heavy on your cash flow depending on the size of your business, you can also ship in LCL, meaning you co-load with other importers. So you put one pallet into a container, and then you load with 10 other importers, which might be your competition, but it's handled by a neutral company, and then you get one pallet into the market. So if you have less than 500 cases, that's an option, and we'll take a look at a cost scenario for that. And then I think the hardest thing for us as a logistics provider, and that's not just JF Hillebrand, it's in general in the industry, is to have a conversation with our customers about capital investment and capital management in accordance to how much do you actually pay up front versus how long does it sit in the warehouse before it's sold, right? Spending money has a cost, so we'll take a look at that. So we took an example of moving 800 cases a year. So this is a small company that's moving 800 cases on a yearly basis from one supplier. There's different ways of moving this into the market. So if we just look at the transit time, because for us to take a look at capital management, we have to look at the transit time for one case of wine. So the first order ready to loading to ship, that means from it's ready from a winery till it goes to the port. If you load a full container, it takes 4 days. If you do a consolidation, that could be, let's say, 3 shipments a year. It could be 4 shipments a year, 6 shipments a year. Then it's going to take 9 days because it takes time to bring it into a warehouse, consolidate it, and then bring it to the port, right? So that's increased time. Then when you look at the actual shipping from the port to the port, that's 14 days. It doesn't matter if it's a small shipment or it's a big shipment. It's the same. It goes on the same vessel. But then when it arrives to the US, again, if we have to take it into a warehouse in New Jersey, a full container takes 3 days approximately. There's some paperwork to be done. But then on a small shipment, we have to deconsolidate it, right? So we add 2 days. So that's the lead time. The big difference is when you bring it into the warehouse, because bringing in a full container, you're going to have to spread out your sales over a full year, right? Which means the average time of the case staying in the warehouse, if you're selling equally 800 cases on a monthly basis, that's what we used in this example, then every case is going to stay on average 169 days in the warehouse if you bring in a full container. If you bring in small shipments, 3 LCL, 4 LCL, or 6 LCL based on 800 cases, it goes from 77 to 31 to 15 days. This is a strategy that an importer or distributor have to make themselves in accordance to how lean can I be, how much sales do I actually know in accordance to my sales planning, and how much buffer do I need in accordance to certain projects, right? So we can't tell you guys if this is the right decision or a bad decision. That's for us to have a conversation with you. So the total supply chain in days when you have a full container is 190 days versus 6 small LCL shipments is 43 days. So if we adapt this to a pricing model, which is very general, we look at the supply chain days from the previous page, and then you look at the logistics cost, which we bundled everything in together, all right? We put in customs, we put in the ocean freight, taxes and duties and insurance. Then you look at $16 a case if you ship a full container. That's just the logistics cost. If you do LCL shipments, you do 25 to 27. So it's a lot more expensive when you look at the actual freight spending. But where the big difference is when you look at the annual capital investment. The annual capital investment is how much does it cost for you guys to spend money? So if you have to spend money or borrow money in the bank, you pay certain, interest. So that interest has a value because it depends on how long do you freeze your cash flow, right? So we calculate that based on the value of the products, how long time does it sit, and then an average is 5% in the US market today. So when you look at the annual capital investment, then for full container, it's a lot more expensive because it sits still for a very long time and you freeze your cash flow, right? So then you look at the total logistics invested cost for one case of wine in this example. A full container is $93. 6 small shipments is $45. This is a conversation that can be very difficult to have with our customers if we're not transparent, right? So it's about, for us, having a transparent relationship with our customers and talk about these things. But at the same time, this is also an example for a very small customer. If you are 5 times the size of this, you bring in 5 containers, the whole calculation can change completely. At the same time, transit times play a really big role when it comes to managing lead time and managing the inventory on the floor, right? So are we dealing with a customer in New York? Are we dealing with a customer in Oakland? Are we dealing with wine from France or wine from Australia? There's a big difference. So when I was asked to come here with some ideas of how to optimize logistics for the industry, it's a very, very broad topic because you guys all need different solutions, right? And it depends on the country, it depends on where you are in the US. We're gonna do questions in the end, or we're gonna do it alone? Any questions, guys? Raise a hand, and this is done for this example.
Is there gonna be a test?
Yes, it's online.
You mentioned that there'll be increased rail traffic in the future. Do you find that that will be cost efficient to shipping as well? To ocean shipping? I'm looking at the lead time from New Zealand to Oakland versus New Zealand to New York, New Jersey.
It's a super question. Can I come back to that in 5 slides? Perfect. This is actually the 1 slide. So sorry. Yeah.
This is fascinating. With all this, do you see driverless cars? Or so this is fascinating. With all this, do you see driverless cars or even big drones or any kind of big disruption in the supply chain?
For the alcohol industry, no, because it's such a red tape business. If you have vehicles without drivers, who's going to control if you drop off, let's say you go direct to retail, right? You're going to drop off a case of wine to a kid that's 12 years old. You're not allowed to do that, right? So I think we have the industry that we're in is a little bit more complex than general products that are distributed by Amazon.com. So 10 years from now, absolutely, it could possibly change, but I would say within the next 5 years, I think the industry is pretty much going to run the way it runs today. Oh, can I go back? Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is a little bit in the direction that you were asking, because obviously we look at how can we optimize everything that we're doing. So this is 2 examples of the business that we handle. So for example, we call something transloading, which is an ocean container comes into a port, we take it out in a warehouse, and then we put it in a truck, and we deliver to final destination. This is 1-for-1. Another way of looking at it is cross-docking, where a container comes in from Europe, we unload it, but then we mix and match with other products and we deliver to final destination. So a good example for the cross-docking is we load a container from France. Instead of loading it at the normal 42,000 pounds, we increase it to 54,000 pounds. It's not allowed to drive on the highways for a certain radius outside the port, but we unload it. We break it in 2, and then we go pick up something, other domestic product. It could be Californian wine that's sitting in New Jersey, or it could be spirits in Chivas that's sitting in a warehouse in New Jersey, and then we deliver it to final destination. This is very common for the Midwest. So this is another way of looking at the business is you can break it down and combine it with other business, right? But again, you have to be pretty transparent and creative. So if we look at an example, which we took a 40-foot reefer container from Antwerp to Chicago. So we took a look at how much does it actually cost in freight to a U.S. port in a reefer container, and you look at $3.17 per case. We match that with a 40-foot container with insulation, which is, it can be any type of insulation, thermal, bubble wrap, blankets, however you refer to it in the US. And then we would ship that because it still has certain protection for the product. That would cost $2 a case. Then from the port to final destination in Chicago, on rail with a shipping line container, it's $2.58 on top versus cross-docking it and delivering it in a reefer trailer to final destination in Chicago, and you end up at a cost difference on $5.75 versus $3.83. Why is it so much cheaper to move it and cross-dock it, have labor do it on a warehouse and put it on a truck and then deliver finally into Chicago? There's a lot of things that play into this. 40-foot reefers. Does the shipping line want a 40-foot reefer in Chicago? If they don't want it in Chicago, they have to reposition it somewhere else because they don't need it there, right? So there's different things that play a role when we look at this. Of course, if it's super, super premium wine and expensive, then you may want to have reefer container all the way door to door with the shipping line. However, if you're shipping in May or April, where the temperatures from France to the US are reasonable, you could use insulation and then cross-dock it into an over-the-road reefer container. The insulation plus the cross-docking is something that is quite common in the wine industry. It's, I guess it's known in the industry as the winter wine program. So saving money versus reefer and then using the insulation, right?
I was just curious about thank you. I was just curious, the dollar amounts that you're giving for your examples, are they based upon current quarter, first quarter, or sometime last year?
This was market rates in February.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we've used approximately 1,200 cases in a container to break it out and break it even. Yeah. So I like to put some figures up there because if not, it's very difficult to have a conversation and actually understand what it is. So we've taken very, very broad market numbers, but obviously use the same calculations for everything that we're benchmarking. All right, so this is in line with what you were discussing before. So a very good point because it's 2 points out of 7. So we look at the domestic business and we look at the intermodal business, which is becoming more and more popular. So it's very cost competitive compared to over the truck. And obviously you need a driver when you go over the road. There's a lot more fuel involved. It's a different fuel when you drive a truck versus when you move it on rail. So we see a shift from over the road into intermodal. So it's a good thing that they've invested a lot in the rail infrastructure. You also see the transit time that has improved. When we look at the domestic business, 75% of all wine consumed in the US is from California. So when we talk about domestic, obviously there's a heavy move towards discussing California wine distribution out to the rest of the US, right? So the best lead time comparison, you have certain areas in the US where over the road just doesn't make sense. So the rail infrastructure is extremely broad when you look at the rail lines that really help support everything that we do. So we took a quick example just to look at the over the road versus intermodal. So for you guys that maybe don't know what intermodal is, so intermodal is taking a 53-foot container and putting it on rail and then moving it somewhere. And when it hits the rail destination, we pick it up in a with a truck, with a chassis, and then we deliver to final destination, right? So it's a combination between people handling it in each end, you put it on rail, and then it moves on train. So that's what we call intermodal. So average transit time, we took an example from California to Kansas, where, of course Kansas, because it's a special place in my heart. The average transit days, when you look at truck, at 3.2 days to deliver into Kansas City, versus rail, 5.65 days. Very specific, but these were the average that we took. And you look at the cost, which has a pretty big difference from 2.28 in a truck to 1.23 on intermodal. Is customers willing to pay $1 premium approximately for 2 days faster service? That's a decision you guys have to make in accordance to how do you do your purchasing, right? There is a third option, if you flip it around, which is rail boxes. So these rail boxes is really, really big boxes. It's 3 containers in one big box. Heavily used by all the big wineries like the Wine Group, the Gallo, the Constellation. They use these type of services. When you're a small customer, it can be difficult to accommodate this. The transit time is extremely long, and if you don't have everything really locked and braced very nicely, and it's big volume, then it becomes a challenge to use. So we haven't used the comparison in this example. Any questions to this? Answered your questions? Super. So risk management, there's a lot of topics under risk management, but we've tried to limit it. So how to minimize unplanned costs in the transport chain. When you guys do your pricing, you go downstairs, you find a fantastic Portuguese wine, and you do some number crunching, and then you go out and sell it, and you realize that you're completely off on logistics, right? Then you guys start yelling at us. So what is important? It's important to understand the interactions between the freight, the customs, and the drayage, because we see this as becoming a bigger and bigger challenge in terms of port congestion. So we're going to take a look at an example of what port congestion actually means. So port congestion is not just delays in terms of lead time, it also has a huge impact in terms of cost with detention and demurrage. And then the documentation timing, how do you manage this with your partners, right? Do you have one partner doing everything for you? Do you have one partner doing the ocean freight from Italy, one guy doing the clearance, and one guy doing the door delivery? Then you have a lot of people involved in a very short time frame. So when we look at that, what we're actually dealing with in the ports, then we specialize in wines and spirits and beer. But our industry is a very, very small fraction of what the rest of the market does. So when we look at the ports in the US and how big they are, then we look at New York, New Jersey, and LA Long Beach, which is definitely the biggest ports. So LA Long Beach is 43% of everything that comes into the US. This has an effect when we deal with business in those areas, and the wine business and the spirits and the beer business is really centralized around New York, New Jersey, California, and Florida. This is where we see a lot of the volumes come in, right? So we're obviously affected by all the rest of the guys that come in with monster vessels from Asia with 22,000 containers, because we end up in the back line. So it has an influence on us, what the rest of the industry is doing. So we take a look at 2 items. The first item is demurrage. Demurrage means how long does the container sit in the port area? So in principle, parking fees. The other part is detention. Detention is the container rent, which means when you pick it up, how long do I keep it, right? So the first point is demurrage. Normally we have about 4 days free. It all depends on the different ports because terms are different in every port, so we've used 4 days. But when you look at what we actually have to do to go pick up a container, it has to be custom cleared. Then you have to go pick up a chassis, meaning the driver has to go find a chassis. Then he has to go into the port and pick up the container, and then he can then deliver it to final destination. If there is a customs inspection, then you cannot pick it up, right? So there's certain things that play a role in the port area And when it exceeds 4 days in the port area, then the clock starts ticking and you start paying demurrage or parking. Once you pick it up, which is what we call detention, now you're paying for the lease. Normally we have about 5 days. These are market general tariff rates from the shipping lines. And now you need to go to the warehouse facilities where you have to deliver this, right? Keep in mind, a year ago, all the goods that came into the alcohol warehouses in New Jersey, there's a couple of really big facilities. You have Western Carriers, you have Fond du Lac, you have Hanover. When you go and deliver to these facilities and you had vessels coming in 3 times a week, they had it all spread out. Now you have one vessel coming in with everything for everybody. So obviously there's going to be a bottleneck in terms of unloading into the warehouse. So they're going to tell you, how about you deliver on Monday morning? So then we go pick up the container, maybe we keep it in a yard, and then we deliver it, right? So then we have a risk in terms of getting it unloaded and getting the container back to the port within the 5 days free that we have. These terms are becoming harder and harder to negotiate with the shipping lines because they've been losing money for 5 years, and this is an area where they can make money. Questions? So how to increase visibility in your supply chain? This is really something you need to talk to your 3PL or your freight forwarder about, right? How can we share information? What information is available? And what can be provided? So when you work with an importer as a supplier, or as an importer you work with a supplier, how do you guys communicate? If you guys have full visibility to what's going on from the beginning to the end, you guys will actually be speaking the same language from the very beginning, right? So what the industry is focused on today, because freight forwarding is not just moving a container, it's really providing information as fast as you can, right? We're a service provider. We don't buy and sell hard products or a bottle of wine. We really sell service. So the key thing for us is speed of information. So where does it start? Where does it end? Are you looking at it from a container, from an order? Are you looking at it all the way down to a SKU? Can you tell me that the Pinot Noir 2014 was picked up yesterday and it's going to arrive in New Jersey on the 25th of June? So these are the things that are available in the industry, and these are the things that you guys should think about when you talk about speed of information. And then, of course, what types of report can be provided in the industry as well. Can you get a report every day? Or can you download an app and you simply put in your order and you can see, this is arriving tomorrow. So when you're out selling wine, you don't necessarily have to be in front of a computer to worry about the logistics side of the business. I could talk a lot about IT, so I'm going to not bore you with this anymore. But if you guys want to talk further about it, we're available after. So how to evaluate the risk in a supply chain? This is very, very broad, but we're going to take a couple of points. As soon as you pick it up in accordance to your Incoterms, if it's ex-works or if it's FCA, the responsibility is 100% on the importer, the owner of the goods at that time. So some key things to at least think about when you guys are doing business is, what measures can you control? You can't control everything. In logistics, things happen. It can be weather. From Argentina to Chile, you got to cross the Andes. In the wintertime, there's snow. We can't cross the Andes for 3 days. We don't make the vessel. You add 1 or 2 weeks to your lead time, right? These are things we can't control. Strikes. There's a lot of strikes. We dealt with it in California 2 years ago very heavily with the union trying to extend the contracts. And we have to come up with new solutions, right? But there's things that we cannot control. There's also things we can control, such as insurance. How do I want to protect my business, right? So when you guys decide to sign insurance or you decide not to sign insurance, it has a risk. Just like you have insurance on your car, just like you have insurance on your house, it's the same thing for business. But the key thing is to understand, what is your insurance actually covering in the small prints? Are you covered for the length of the transport? Are you covered for when it sits in the warehouse? Are you covered when it goes for the last mile delivery? These are some of the things that you guys should at least be aware of, right? So we cannot make such a tight business case when we want to develop new business and we want to sell new wines if we cannot consider some of these points. So how are you going to handle delays and damage that are not covered? If there is a delay, make sure that you work with people that have an infrastructure that can help you. So that depends on your business. Are you talking California to the US? Then they need to have an infrastructure in the US that can solve the problem. If you're talking international freight, make sure that they have representation from wherever you decide to work from. If you decide to work out of France, make sure that they have people there that understand the business so they can solve the problems when you really need a problem to be solved. And then what level of confidence do you have in your third-party providers? So this is general for all of us, not Hillebrand, but everybody. You know, sometimes freight forwarders can be almost like your dirty laundry, and we're substituted for $50. We believe that the direction that the business is going is $50 on a container from France to New York is not going to make the difference for you guys to be competitive in the market. If you guys have to be competitive in the market, you need to have a smart supply chain. To have a smart supply chain, there has to be transparent conversations with the supplier, the importer, the distributor, and some kind of a logistics provider, right? Whoever it is. So what does that actually mean? Who do you want to work with? When you look at the top 10 states in the US, you have more than 3,000 freight forwarders that provide logistics services. So it can be pretty difficult to choose who you want to work with. There are, I would probably say, in the area of 10 companies that specialize in the alcohol industry, that has services that are catered to the alcohol industry. So you have a choice, of course, to focus on those guys that understand the business. And then how do you evaluate them? How do you make sure that they live up to what you guys are actually expecting from them? You can do metrics, you can do reports, you can analyze transit times versus what was really promised. Pricing. When you look at the pricing between one guy versus another guy, then make sure you compare apples to apples because pricing looks different from everybody in the industry. Value-added services. Is there IT? Is there visibility? Is there cross-docking operations that you guys can take advantage of? And do they have tailored solutions to the alcohol industry in general to you guys, right? So that's what I had today. So the picture is in principle to play a symphony, you cannot do that alone. You need an orchestra behind you to deliver the show. We look at ourselves as part of that orchestra. So we can do a lot of different things. Freight forwarders can do a lot of different things. So we're very open for transparent discussions. And I hope that these examples gave you a little bit of brainstorming to understand what we deal with from a small scale to a big scale. And of course, we work with everybody in the industry. So thanks for your time.